Hello and welcome to another session on mapping data to components. So this particular session will be all about optimizing the code that we previously wrote, and in which I believe I mentioned that there's one redundancy that or let's say repeated segments of code that we ought to remove, and in this session we'll see how to do that. So let's get right into it. I hope you are able to see my screen now. So we have our old card components here from which the initial story began. So up till our last session, let me pop this out. So up till our last session, we have we have built this particular little site of ours in which we had these three cards, okay, and these image avatars, and we had this card component here. We were populating all the data regarding name, this image, and these imaginary phone numbers and email IDs. We were populating them using by the usage of React props, and then we were fetching that data from this particular file inside this array using that. But the repeatedness that we were observing was this particular one. Like we can see that just these parameters, which is the index of this array. If we see here at the 0th index, we have this okay, it is very long. In the 0th one, we have this Batman one, the second one this, and the third one this. So apart from these changes in the index, there's nothing relatively new in all these three pieces of code. So this is something that we want to avoid, and in order to do so, what we will do is, first of all, let's just comment this out, this entire custom card component like this. And in order to start using this, what we will do is, let's get hold of something called info.map. All right, so we will be implementing this one function that we have, the map function. And if you have been doing coding for a while, you might be aware of something called loops, right? So what is the basic idea of a loop? Like if you do your coding in some popular language like CPP or Java, we have for loops, while loops. So basically what they do is, if you have some particular data structure, as in this case we have an array right here, so loop helps us to write a generic condition or a generic statement which we want to apply for every individual element or every individual piece of that data structure. For example, if I want to, let's say, print every element of this array, so one method will be to explicitly write every particular index, like info 0, 1, 2 up till n. What loop does for us is, it can provide us with one dynamic variable like I, which will iterate from the initial index of this particular array to the last index of this particular array, which will be n minus 1 in case the array is sized n. So what this particular map function does is, it is similar to that loop that we discussed, but in here we are supposed to provide another function. Now what I mean by this is, you will this will get clear once we demonstrate it, just bear with me. So inside this map function, first of all, we are applying this map function onto our info, this info which is an array that we are exporting from info.js. okay, so we are applying this method, this function on info, and then inside this we are passing another function called create card, which hasn't been created yet. So let's create this new function called create card, and in here, let's say we have the info array right here, and we want to return our custom card component here. And now what I'm going to do is, okay, so first thing that you might be seeing right here is that info.map and this stuff is directly get it printed here. And the reason for this is because we have not wrapped it inside these curly braces. So we were not able to see that, the React was not able to understand what this stands for. So in order to convey that, okay, we are writing some logic here, we have to wrap them inside these curly braces. And now you can see that, okay, let's do one thing more and it will turn very clear to you. So now what I'm going to do is, I have created a function called create card, and in this, let's say I'm passing one prop called info, and I'm saying that, okay, create one card component that will have its name equals to this prop, which is info dot name, like this. So now if you see this, what is happening right now is we are having our 3 cards as previously, and for all 3 of them we are having their names right here. All right, so even though I only wrote info.name here, and we are iterating, we are applying this map function onto this info array that we are importing from info.js. For each element, if you see here, the name is getting printed here, the name. So what this map function is basically doing is, inside this info array, if you see, actually these image URLs, they create very mess out of this array. So at number first point, we had name as Batman. So info 0 dot name is Batman right here. Info 1 dot name is Daredevil, and info 2 dot name is Wolverine. So what this particular map function is doing is, it is getting hold of each element inside this info array, iterating through them, and then one by one it is passing that particular information, that entire object as a prop, to this function, the function that we mentioned right here. And then according to the convention of React props, we are further providing that the name attribute of this custom card component as the name property of this prop that we just passed right here. And if you see inside card, we have already set up all the name and the telephone number, the email, and the image URL accordingly. So let's populate and the entire data out. The name we are going to mark as name. Another thing was img. Okay, so img will be passed as info dot img URL, because you can see inside this array the image URL is stored inside img URL. And further we have tel, okay, for contact number. So we'll say that this will be equal to info dot tel, or let's see, it is phone actually. Inside the info array, the phone number is inside the phone attribute, and the last one is email. We can cross check it with here only, instead of returning to info.js, it is email. So info.email. All right, so if I head over back to here, now you can see that we are able to achieve everything that we were able to initially, but previously we had to write this separately 3 times. All right, so we had 3 card components, so it wasn't that much painful. But imagine what if we had 100 card components right here. What if we had let's say 1,000 entries inside this info array of us, 1,000 objects inside this instead of 3 of them. So at such particular point, we simply hard coding stuff doesn't work out for you. All right, so what we did was, we used this map method, which takes a function inside this, and what it does is, it iterates through this whatever data structure you pass here. In the case we are passing array, it iterates through every element in this array. In our case, every element is an object. So here it iterates through every object inside this info array, and it passes this as prop inside this create card function. So for every element or for every object of this info array, we get to put the name, image URL, phone and email to the custom card component accordingly. So for the first object, the data is populated like this. For the second one, it is populated like this. And in the third one, it is populated like this. So all of these are being passed as props to our custom component. So if you once see inside our console, let me refresh this once. Okay, now you can see that we are being shown one warning right here, and it says that each child in a list should have a unique key property. All right, so what it wants to say is that React's that it is a standard procedure for React to have a key property in order to differentiate between components. So if you are watching chronologically this particular playlist, you might know that very initially in the starting phase, we discussed how React compares or differentiates between component by comparing virtual DOM with the real DOM, all right, in order to spot the difference. And in order to do that, it is expecting you to provide a key attribute right here so as to differentiate between components. But remember that this particular key attribute is only for the usage of React. Okay, so what do we mean by this is, let's say inside info.js, okay, let us create some IDs also right here like this. Okay, let's say the ID of this is 1, and if we go down a bit in Daredevil, we'll say that we have a property of ID which will be marked as 2, and then we head over to the third entry here, and here we'll say let's mark the ID as 3. Okay, let's save this. So now what we can do is ID equals to 1. Okay, there's something unexpected token. Let's see, ID is 1. Okay, so what's the issue? Okay, mistakenly I wrote an equal sign right there. Instead we have to write colon, okay, because these are key value pairs inside an object. So let's just apply these colons like this, and this is working just fine, heading inside this. So now what do we have, what unique attribute we have for each element inside this array? It is the ID, this key of ID. So what we can do is we can mark this key as equal to info.id, which means now React can have the key property of the whatever the component that we are passing. It will say that okay, one key property of each of these components will be kept with React, and that will be pointing to this ID we have. So if now I refresh this and check our console, you can see that particular warning is gone. So we just provided one differentiated factor to our React, and if you see right here, like if you check out these card right here, okay, let me move it out a bit. So if you see that for the card that we saw, okay, might always create this problem. Okay, so if we select this card component right here, you can see inside props we are only having these 4 properties mentioned: email, image, name and telephone, whereas the key that we pass right here, like 1, 2 and 3, they are like kept separately. Now what I mean by this, I'll tell you in just a moment. And always remember that this key that we marked here as 1 in string and 2 and 3, it need not be string or an integer or whatever. it can be any thing you like. The only thing to remember is that the key should always be, or whatever attribute you are marking as key for your component, it should be unique. So what we can do next is, if you head over to this card component of yours, okay, in here what I want you guys to do is, let's call this a little challenge for you. So I want you guys to add one para tag right here, right? One para tag, like we have an h2 right here with props.name. I want to add you guys to add an para tag right here that will display the ID. What is the ID? This one. For Batman it should be 1, for second one it should be 2, and for third one it should be 3. So I want you guys to display that ID number right here by the use of one para tag. Alright, and you can try figuring out how to do this. So pause this now and give it a try yourself. Okay, so the most simple thing that we can think of is, let's just create a para tag like this, and inside this we can just tap into, okay, we see that we have mentioned this ID inside this key prop right here. Okay, so why not simply use it by using the dot operator like this. And if we try to refresh this, you can see that nothing is coming here. And if we open our console, we are getting one warning. It is saying that key is not a prop. Trying to access it will result in undefined being returned. If you need to access the same value within the child component, you should pass it as a different prop. So what this code sandbox is telling us via this warning is that even though we are required to have one key property right here, one attribute called key, but this particular attribute will be reserved for the usage of React. Alright, we cannot use it inside our project. So whatever data, whatever value is being stored inside this queue, inside this key attribute, whatever unique value that you are storing inside it, you cannot access it directly by the usage of this dot operator. Instead, if you want to use it, you have to create another attribute for you. So now we are creating another attribute simply called ID, and instead of putting dot key right here, we'll put dot ID. And then if you refresh this, you'll be able to see that right here you can see that the ID that we had 1, 2 and 3, it is now getting rendered right here. So always remember, even though you might think that why we are doing this redundant code, so it is the standard procedure, and this React working behind the scenes, and there's some reason why they want this key to be reserved for React only. Okay, so always remember, we have to create another attribute if we want to, and this is applicable only for this key attribute. The remaining properties, the remaining attributes that you mention here, that you are passing in as props to another component, you can use them freely as many times and wherever you want to use them. So now we can remove all of this cluttering code like this, and you can see that how much the code that we wrote has reduced. And if we remove this was just for some demonstration purpose. Let us remove this from here as well. You can see that this particular card is now unchanged, and inside this app.jsx we have just created this function right here, and we have used this map method for this info array, and the number of lines that we initially wrote is now down to a very small number. So this was to optimize our initially whatever we created in the last session. Moving forward, we'll see some functions that will be extensively using throughout the course and throughout your journey as a developer. Let's see what that is. So I hope you were able to understand what we did in this particular session. Basically, optimize our code, reduce the repetitiveness, and tried new methods in order to make our life easier as developers. Now, some of you might be itching to say that we could also have the for each function right here. All right, there's one method called for each, which is similar to what we achieved using this map method of ours. And for those of you who know about it, go use this particular sandbox link that I'll be providing and try to substitute for each right here. And whatever we did with this map method of ours in this particular session, I want you to try and achieve the same thing by the use of for each. Now, what is this for each method, why we should use it, and which one is better, whether either the map one or this particular one. This thing you can mark this as your homework. You can go out, Google it a bit, see it on Stack Overflow and other forums. Try to find out what are the differences between them, how to use the for each one, and especially for those of you who never heard of this particular method. It is always better to have as many tools in your toolbox as possible, because depending on the scenario in which you are, you should be able to very quickly decide which particular tool is going to be the most efficient in order to use in this particular case. So do let me know in the comment section, and if I see some guys requesting me to explain what this for each method is and you are not able to grasp the concept, do let me know in the comment section, and I will try to cover that part in the upcoming sessions as well. So I'm finishing this particular session right here, otherwise it will be very longer one. And regarding the functions that I said that we'll study that in the upcoming session. So that's all, and I'll see you in the next one.